Restaurant manager breaks egg on waitress, unaware the Millionaire CEO was nearby. The dinner rush was in full swing at the Golden Spoon, one of the most elegant restaurants in the city. Waiters hurried across the marble floor, trays balanced in trembling hands, while the scent of roasted salmon and truffle butter filled the air. Among them was Lena, a young brown-skinned waitress with quiet eyes and a gentle smile. She was known for her politeness, always the first to greet a customer, the last to complain, and the one who'd often skip her own break to help others. But tonight, her luck had run out. The restaurant manager, Mr. Collins, had been in a foul mood all evening. The kitchen was behind schedule, a VIP reservation had been messed up, and as usual, he needed someone to blame. When Lena accidentally dropped a glass of juice near table 7, his patience snapped. "You clumsy girl," he hissed, his voice echoing loud enough for the guests to turn. "Do you even know how much that table costs? You're ruining this restaurant with your incompetence." Lena bowed her head, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry, sir." It slipped. Before she could finish, Collins grabbed an egg from a decorative breakfast display on the counter. With an arrogant sneer, he cracked it right over her head. Gasps filled the room. The egg dripped down her hair, yolk sliding across her cheek as she stood frozen, humiliated. The restaurant fell silent. And that's when a calm, commanding voice broke through. "Is this how you treat your staff, Mr. Collins?" Everyone turned. Standing near the entrance was Daniel Hale, the restaurant's owner and one of the most respected millionaires in the city. "Before we continue with this story, I want you to tell me where you are watching from and what time is it. If you are new here, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story." Daniel Hale had come to the Golden Spoon that Friday evening, without announcement, without the usual entourage of assistants and security that typically accompanied his visits to the various businesses he owned across the city. At 35, Daniel had built an empire that included 12 high-end restaurants, 3 luxury hotels, and a real estate portfolio worth hundreds of millions. But success had taught him something crucial: you never truly knew how your businesses operated until you showed up unannounced and saw them as an ordinary customer would. Tonight, he dressed casually: dark jeans, a simple button-down shirt, no designer labels visible, and entered through the front entrance like any other guest. He'd planned to observe from a corner table, to watch his staff work, to assess whether his general manager was running things according to the standards Daniel had established. The Golden Spoon was his flagship restaurant, the first one he'd opened 8 years ago when he was still building his fortune, and it held special significance for him. But what he'd witnessed in the past 2 minutes had turned his stomach and ignited a fury he rarely allowed himself to feel. He'd seen the young waitress Lena, according to her name tag, carrying a tray of drinks toward table 7. He'd noticed how carefully she moved, how she navigated the crowded dining room with practiced precision. Then he'd seen the moment it happened, another waiter had backed up suddenly from a neighboring table, bumping into Lena just as she was setting down the drinks. The collision was clearly not her fault, clearly an accident caused by the other waiter's carelessness. But the glass of orange juice had tumbled from her tray anyway, shattering on the marble floor near table 7, the liquid spreading in a sticky pool that immediately drew everyone's attention. Daniel had watched Lena's face, seen the panic, the immediate apology forming on her lips. He'd watched her grab napkins, drop to her knees to clean up the mess, murmuring apologies to the startled guests at table 7 who'd gotten splashed with droplets of juice. And he'd watched Mr. Collins, the general manager Daniel had hired 2 years ago, based on impressive credentials and glowing references, stride across the dining room with a look of rage, completely disproportionate to a simple broken glass. Now, standing in the entrance, watching egg yolk drip down Lena's face while the entire restaurant held its breath, Daniel felt something fundamental shift in his chest. This was his establishment. These were his employees. This young woman being humiliated in front of a packed dining room was working under his name, representing his business, and she was being treated like garbage by someone Daniel had entrusted with management. "Yes, sir," Collins stammered, his face going pale as recognition dawned. "Mr. Hale, I didn't know you were. I wasn't expecting." "Clearly," Daniel said, his voice cutting through Collins's attempts at explanation. His tone was quiet, but carried absolute authority, the kind of voice that made people stop and listen. Because if you knew I was here, you'd remember that this establishment runs on dignity, not abuse. That every person wearing our uniform deserves respect, regardless of their position. He moved forward into the dining room, his presence commanding despite the casual clothes. Diners recognized him. Whispers rippled through the room as people realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Daniel Hale, the notoriously private millionaire who rarely appeared in public, was here, and he was clearly furious. Daniel ignored everyone else, walking directly to where Lena stood frozen, egg still dripping down her hair and face, her dark eyes wide with shock and humiliation. He could see her trying not to cry, see her fighting to maintain composure, even as her entire body trembled. "Miss," Daniel said gently, his voice softening dramatically. "Are you all right?" Lena opened her mouth, but no words came out. She just nodded, though tears were starting to track through the egg yolk on her cheeks. Daniel pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket linen, monogrammed, the kind of small luxury he usually took for granted, and carefully wiped the egg from her face. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, that the dining room seemed to collectively hold its breath. This wealthy man, owner of the restaurant, kneeling slightly to be at eye level with his humiliated employee, cleaning her face with his own expensive handkerchief. Several diners pulled out phones, clearly recording the moment. But Daniel didn't care about the publicity or potential social media fallout. All he cared about was the frightened young woman in front of him who'd been treated with such casual cruelty. "What's your name?" Daniel asked quietly. "Lena," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lena Rivera, sir." "Lena," Daniel repeated, making sure she was looking at him, making sure she saw that he was addressing her as a person worthy of dignity. "I'm Daniel Hale. I own this restaurant, and I need you to know that what just happened is absolutely unacceptable. You don't deserve to be treated this way. No one does." Lena's tears spilled over completely then, sobs she'd been holding back finally breaking free. Daniel wanted to comfort her more, but he was aware of the audience, aware that any further physical contact might make her more uncomfortable. Instead, he stood and turned to face Collins, who'd been standing nearby, looking increasingly panicked. "You're finished here," Daniel said, his voice returning to that cold, controlled fury. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you out and collect your personal items. HR will be in touch regarding your final paycheck and termination paperwork." Gasps rippled through the dining room again. Collins's face cycled through shock, anger, and fear in rapid succession. "Mr. Hale, please, I can explain. The kitchen was behind. We had VIP complaints. The pressure was..." "Pressure," Daniel repeated flatly. "So your solution to feeling pressured was to humiliate an employee in front of a packed dining room? To physically assault her by breaking an egg on her head? That's your management style? It was just, she's always making mistakes. She's..." Collins was grasping now, trying to justify the unjustifiable. "Stop talking," Daniel commanded. "Lena, has Mr. Collins treated you this way before?" Lena hesitated, clearly afraid of making things worse despite Collins already being fired. Daniel saw her internal struggle, the fear of retaliation, the instinct to minimize, the worry about causing trouble. "You can be honest," he assured her. "Mr. Collins no longer has any power over you or anyone else here." "Yes," Lena finally whispered. "Not the egg, but he yells a lot. Calls us names, blames us for things that aren't our fault, makes us feel small." Her voice grew slightly stronger as she spoke, as if finally voicing these truths was liberating. "He made Carla cry last week because she asked for a sick day. He told Jeremy he was worthless and should quit if he couldn't handle basic tasks. He creates an environment where we're all terrified all the time." Daniel's jaw clenched. He looked around the dining room, seeing other waitstaff nodding subtly, confirming Lena's account. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern of abuse that had been happening under his name, in his establishment, while he'd been too focused on expansion and profits to notice. "Everyone," Daniel said, raising his voice to address the entire restaurant staff and diners alike, "I want to make something very clear. The way Mr. Collins behaved tonight, the way he apparently has been behaving for some time, is completely contrary to the values this restaurant was founded on. No uniform, no title, no position gives anyone the right to demean another human being. Your worth is not determined by your job title or your bank account. It's determined by how you treat others, especially those who have less power than you. He paused, making eye contact with various staff members who were watching with expressions ranging from shock to vindication to relief. If any of you have experienced similar treatment from Mr. Collins or anyone else in management, I want you to report it to HR. There will be no retaliation. Your jobs are secure, and I promise you, this kind of abuse will not be tolerated in any business I own. Security arrived, then two professionals in dark suits who'd been stationed discreetly near the entrance. Daniel gestured to Collins. "Please escort Mr. Collins out. He's no longer employed here." Collins tried to protest as security took his arms. "You can't do this. I have a contract. I'll sue for wrongful termination. This is—" "You assaulted an employee," Daniel said coldly. "In front of dozens of witnesses. You created a hostile work environment. You violated every clause in your contract regarding treatment of staff. My lawyers will be very interested in any lawsuit you want to file. I encourage you to try." The fight went out of Collins then, reality apparently setting in. He'd just destroyed his career in the restaurant industry, possibly his entire professional life, because he couldn't control his temper and his need to feel powerful by making others feel small. Security led him out through the kitchen to avoid further disruption to the dining room. After Collins was gone, Daniel turned back to the staff and diners. "I apologize to everyone, to our guests for having your evening disrupted, and to our staff for allowing a toxic manager to create such an environment. The Golden Spoon will be better than this. We'll do better." Then he looked at Lena, who was still standing there with egg in her hair, clearly overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. "Lena, your shift is over. Please go clean up and change. Then I'd like to speak with you privately in my office if you're willing. Not to reprimand you, you've done absolutely nothing wrong. I just want to understand better what's been happening here." Lena nodded mutely, then hurried toward the staff area, still crying but now from relief rather than humiliation. Several other waitresses followed her, clearly going to provide support and probably debrief about the extraordinary scene they'd all just witnessed. Daniel turned to the remaining staff. "Who's the senior server on duty tonight?" A middle-aged man with graying hair stepped forward nervously. "That's me, sir. Ramon Diaz. I've been here since the restaurant opened." "Ramon, you're acting manager for tonight and possibly longer, depending on how quickly I can find a replacement for Collins. Do you feel comfortable with that responsibility?" Ramon looked stunned. "Yes, sir. Absolutely. I know all the systems, I know the staff, I can handle it." "Good. Thank you. Run the rest of service as smoothly as possible. Comp any table that was significantly disrupted by this incident. And Ramon, I'll be back to observe operations more frequently. This was a failure on my part, being absent too much, trusting the wrong person, not creating clear channels for staff to report problems. That changes now." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Daniel stayed for another 30 minutes, moving through the dining room, apologizing personally to guests who'd had their meals interrupted by the drama. Most were remarkably understanding, some even praising him for how he'd handled the situation. One woman, elderly and elegantly dressed, caught his arm as he passed. "Young man, what you did for that girl that took character," she said. "My late husband owned restaurants for 40 years, and I can't tell you how many times I saw managers abuse their power like that. Most owners never knew or didn't care. You cared. That matters." "Thank you, ma'am," Daniel said sincerely. "But I should have known sooner, should have created better systems to prevent this." "You're human," she replied. "What matters is what you do now. That girl will never forget that someone powerful stood up for her when she was powerless. That's a gift." After checking that the dining room had settled back into normal operations, Daniel headed to his office, a small but well-appointed space on the restaurant's second floor that he rarely used but kept for occasions like this. He waited there, reviewing staffing files and making notes about systemic changes he needed to implement, until a soft knock came at his door. "Come in," he called. Lena entered hesitantly, now wearing her street clothes, simple jeans and a sweater, her hair damp from washing out the egg, her face clean but still showing signs of recent tears. She looked young and vulnerable, and nothing like the professional server who'd been working the floor an hour ago. "Please, sit down," Daniel said gently, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Would you like some water? Coffee? Tea?" Water would be good, thank you," Lena said, her voice still quiet but steadier than before. Daniel poured water from a pitcher he kept in the office, handed her the glass, then sat down across from her rather than behind his desk. He wanted this to feel like a conversation between equals, not an interrogation. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Honestly, I don't know," Lena admitted. Relieved, scared, confused, grateful, all of it at once. She took a sip of water, her hands steadier now. "Thank you, Mr. Hale, for what you did down there, for defending me, for firing Mr. Collins. I've wanted to report him for months, but I was terrified of losing my job. Please, call me Daniel," he said. "And Lena, I need to apologize to you. As the owner, I'm responsible for creating an environment where employees feel safe reporting abuse. The fact that you, and apparently many others, were too frightened to come forward means I failed to build that environment. That's on me, not on you." "You couldn't have known," Lena said. "You're not here every day. Mr. Collins was very careful to be charming whenever anyone important was around. It was only with us, the people he had power over, that he showed his true nature." "Tell me about it," Daniel said. "Everything. How long has this been going on? What has he done? Who else has he targeted?" For the next hour, Lena shared stories that made Daniel increasingly angry, not at her, but at his own blindness to what had been happening. Collins's abuse had been systematic and calculated. He'd berate staff for minor mistakes while ignoring major issues caused by his own poor planning. He'd pit employees against each other, creating competition and resentment rather than teamwork. He'd taken credit for successful services while blaming staff when things went wrong. "He made us feel like we were lucky to have jobs here," Lena said, "like we were replaceable and worthless. Some of the best servers we had quit because they couldn't take it anymore. That's why we've had such high turnover in the past year." Daniel made notes, already planning the conversation he'd need to have with his HR department about why these issues hadn't reached his attention. "Lena, can I ask you something personal? You don't have to answer if you're not comfortable. Everything's are in the Colomanti." "Okay," she said cautiously. "Why do you work here? What keeps you coming back despite how Collins treated you?" Lena was quiet for a moment, clearly deciding how much to share. "I have a younger brother," she finally said. "Tommy, he's 14. Our parents died in a car accident 3 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light and killed them instantly. I was 21 at the time. Tommy was 11. I became his legal guardian." "I'm so sorry," Daniel said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "Thank you." Lena's eyes were distant, remembering. "We had some life insurance from our parents, but not enough to cover everything: housing, food, Tommy's school expenses, medical bills from the accident. I was in college at the time, studying to be a teacher. I had to drop out to work full-time. The Golden Spoon paid better than most server jobs, and the tips were good when we had busy nights. I couldn't afford to quit, no matter how bad Collins made it." "What about other family? Aunts, uncles, grandparents?" "Our mom's parents are dead. Our dad's parents are alive, but they're elderly and don't have resources to help raise a teenager. We have some distant cousins, but no one who could or would take responsibility for Tommy. So it's been just the two of us for 3 years now." Daniel felt his chest tighten with a mixture of respect and sadness. This young woman, barely into her 20s, had taken on the responsibility of raising a teenager while working a demanding job and enduring abuse from a manager who should have been supporting her. "You said you were studying to be a teacher. Is that still your dream?" "Someday, maybe," Lena said, a wistful note in her voice. "Right now, I'm just trying to keep Tommy in school, keep food on the table, keep a roof over our heads. Dreams feel like luxuries I can't afford." "What if I told you that you could afford them?" Daniel asked carefully. Lena looked confused. "I don't understand." "Lena, I'd like to offer you a different position in my company. Not as a server, though there's absolutely nothing wrong with that job, but in a role that pays better, has better hours, and provides opportunities for growth. I need someone who understands customer service from the ground up, who has genuine empathy for both staff and guests, who can help me rebuild the culture here at the Golden Spoon and potentially at my other restaurants. What kind of position? Lena asked, clearly skeptical that this was real. Guest services coordinator to start, Daniel said. You'd work with all our front-of-house staff, help train new employees, serve as a liaison between staff and management, identify problems before they become crises. It would pay significantly more than serving, with full benefits including health insurance for both you and Tommy. And Lena, I'd also like to establish an education fund that would allow you to finish your degree part-time while working. Lena stared at him, tears filling her eyes again. Why? Why would you do all this for me? Because you deserve it, Daniel said simply. Because you've been working hard in terrible conditions and never gave up. Because you took on responsibility for your brother that most people your age couldn't handle. Because I watched you tonight before the incident with Collins and saw how you treated guests and how you helped other servers. You're exactly the kind of employee I want representing my business. This isn't charity, Lena. This is me recognizing talent and value when I see it. I don't know what to say, Lena whispered. Say you'll think about it, Daniel suggested. Take the weekend. Talk to your brother. Consider whether this is something you want. Then call me Monday with your decision. He handed her a business card with his direct number. And Lena, regardless of what you decide about the new position, your server job is absolutely secure. No one will retaliate against you for tonight. You have my word on that. Lena clutched the card like it was a lifeline. Thank you for everything, for defending me, for believing me, for seeing me as a person instead of just another employee. You're not just another anything, Daniel said. You're a woman showing extraordinary strength in difficult circumstances. That deserves recognition and respect. After Lena left, Daniel sat alone in his office for a long time, thinking about the evening's events. He'd come to the Golden Spoon, planning a simple observation visit. Instead, he'd witnessed abuse, fired a manager, and met a young woman whose quiet dignity and resilience had impressed him profoundly. Something had shifted tonight, not just in his restaurant's management, but in Daniel himself. He'd built his fortune by being smart and strategic, by making calculated decisions and maintaining professional distance. But watching Lena stand there with egg dripping down her face, humiliated and afraid, had cracked something open in his carefully controlled businessman persona. He'd felt rage, yes, but also a fierce protective instinct that went beyond simple employee-employer responsibility. Something about Lena, her gentleness, her strength, her determination to care for her brother despite impossible circumstances, had touched him in ways he wasn't quite ready to examine. Daniel was used to being pursued for his money, his status, his connections. Women he dated inevitably wanted something from him, whether they admitted it or not. But Lena hadn't asked for anything. She'd been working hard, enduring abuse, taking care of her family, and never complained or demanded recognition. That kind of authenticity was rare in Daniel's world, and he found himself hoping she'd accept his job offer, not just because she deserved the opportunity, but because he wanted to know her better, wanted to understand the person who could maintain kindness and dignity, even when being treated so poorly. It was nearly midnight when Daniel finally left the Golden Spoon. The restaurant had closed, staff had gone home, and the building was dark except for security lighting. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the elegant facade of his flagship restaurant, and made a silent promise. Things would be different now. He would be more present, more aware, more engaged with the people who made his success possible. He would create systems that protected vulnerable employees and encouraged them to speak up about problems. He would build a company culture based on respect and dignity, not fear and hierarchy, and somehow, in the process of making these changes, he suspected Lena Rivera would play a significant role, not just as an employee, but as the person who'd reminded him why he'd started building businesses in the first place, to create something meaningful, to provide opportunities, and to make people's lives better rather than just accumulating wealth. As Daniel drove home through empty city streets, he couldn't stop thinking about dark eyes filled with tears, a gentle smile that persisted despite cruelty, and a young woman who'd shown more courage than most people he knew. He'd defended her tonight because it was right. But something told him this was the beginning of something much more significant than just a personnel change at his restaurant. Sometimes, Daniel thought, justice and unexpected connection arrived in the same moment. Sometimes defending someone revealed not just their character, but illuminated something in yourself that you hadn't known was missing. And sometimes, the person you stood up for ended up being exactly the person you needed in your life, for reasons that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with recognizing genuine worth when you finally encountered it. Lena Rivera had walked into his restaurant's dining room as just another server. She'd leave if she accepted his offer as someone who'd changed the trajectory of both his business and possibly his personal life. And it had all started with a broken glass, a cruel manager, and a moment when Daniel had chosen to step forward rather than look away. That choice, he suspected, would ripple outward in ways neither of them could yet imagine. Monday morning arrived with Lena sitting at her small kitchen table, staring at Daniel Hale's business card like it might disappear if she looked away too long. The weekend had been a blur of emotions: relief, anxiety, hope, fear, all tangled together until she could barely distinguish one from another. Tommy sat across from her, eating cereal before school, watching his sister with the kind of perceptive concern that 14-year-olds sometimes surprised you with. "You're gonna call him, right?" Tommy asked between bites. "The rich guy who fired that jerk Collins?" "I don't know," Lena admitted. "What if this is too good to be true? What if I accept the job and it turns out to be some kind of mistake or he changes his mind?" "Lena, he literally defended you in front of an entire restaurant," Tommy pointed out with teenager logic. "He fired his manager for you. He offered you a better job and said he'd help pay for you to finish college. Why would he do all that if he didn't mean it?" "I don't know. Maybe he felt guilty. Maybe he was just caught up in the moment and now he regrets it." Lena knew she was grasping at reasons to be afraid, but 3 years of struggling had taught her that good things usually came with hidden costs. "Or maybe," Tommy said, his voice going soft, "maybe he's a good person who saw you being treated badly and wanted to help. Those exist, you know. Good people." Lena looked at her little brother, though he wasn't so little anymore, nearly as tall as she was now, his face losing its childish roundness and taking on the angular features that reminded her painfully of their father. Tommy had been 11 when they'd lost their parents, still a kid who needed protection from the world's cruelty. Now he was 14, mature beyond his years because tragedy had forced him to grow up faster than he should have. "When did you get so wise?" Lena asked, smiling despite her anxiety. "I learned from the best," Tommy said, grinning. "You've been taking care of me for 3 years, working terrible jobs with terrible bosses, sacrificing everything so I could stay in school and have a normal life. Maybe it's time someone took care of you for a change. Maybe Mr. Hale is that person." "It's not his job to take care of me," Lena protested. "No, but he wants to help," Tommy countered. "And Lena, we need help. You work yourself to exhaustion every week. You've put your dreams on hold to raise me. If this guy is offering you a chance to have both a good job and finishing your degree, why wouldn't you take it?" Lena knew Tommy was right. She picked up her phone before fear could change her mind and dialed the number on Daniel's business card. It rang 3 times, and she was about to hang up when a familiar voice answered. "Daniel Hale." "Mr. Hale, it's Lena Rivera, from the Golden Spoon." Her voice came out more nervous than she'd intended. "Lena," Daniel said, and she could hear genuine warmth in his tone. "I'm glad you called. Have you had time to think about my offer?" "Yes, sir. I've thought about it a lot, actually, and if the offer still stands, I'd like to accept the guest services coordinator position and the education fund." "The offer absolutely still stands," Daniel assured her. "In fact, I've already had HR draw up the paperwork. When can you come by my main office to sign the contract and discuss details?" They arranged to meet that afternoon at Daniel's corporate headquarters, a sleek glass building downtown that housed his restaurant group's main operations. Lena arrived 15 minutes early, wearing the one professional outfit she owned, feeling completely out of place in the marble and chrome lobby. Daniel's assistant, a friendly woman named Patricia who immediately put Lena at ease, showed her to a conference room where Daniel was waiting. He stood when she entered, offering his hand with a genuine smile. "Lena, thank you for coming. Please, sit down." For the next hour, they went through the details of Lena's new position. The salary was nearly double what she'd been making as a server, with full health insurance for both her and Tommy, paid vacation time, and a retirement contribution plan she'd never even dreamed of having access to. The education fund would cover her tuition, books, and fees to complete her teaching degree part-time at the local university. "This is too much," Lena kept saying. "I don't understand why you're doing all this." "Because you deserve it," Daniel replied each time. "Because I saw how you treated guests even when you were being treated terribly by your manager. Because you took responsibility for your brother when you could have made easier choices. Because I need people with your integrity and work ethic building the culture I want in my company." The contract was straightforward and fair, reviewed by Daniel's legal team to ensure everything was above board. Lena signed it with trembling hands, still half expecting someone to burst in and tell her this was all a mistake. "There's one more thing I'd like to discuss," Daniel said after the paperwork was complete. "I'm planning to implement new policies across all my restaurants to prevent what happened with Collins from happening again. Anonymous reporting systems, regular employee surveys, mandatory management training on respectful workplace practices. I'd like your input on what would actually be helpful versus what would just be performative." Over the next 2 hours, Lena and Daniel discussed systemic changes that could protect vulnerable employees. Lena found herself relaxing as they talked, surprised by how genuinely Daniel listened to her perspective. He didn't dismiss her ideas or treat her like she didn't understand business realities. He engaged with her suggestions, asked thoughtful questions, made notes on improvements she proposed. "You're really good at this," Daniel observed, "identifying problems and proposing practical solutions. That's exactly what I need in a guest services coordinator." "I've had a lot of experience with what doesn't work," Lena said wryly. 3 years of bad management teaches you what employees actually need." As their meeting wrapped up, Daniel hesitated, then said, "Lena, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but would you be willing to have dinner with me sometime? Not as employer and employee, just as two people getting to know each other. You can absolutely say no without any professional consequences. I'd like to know you better outside the context of work." Lena felt her heart skip. Was Daniel Hale asking her on a date? The millionaire CEO who defended her and offered her a dream job now wanted to spend personal time with her? "I don't know if that's a good idea," she said carefully. "You're my boss now. Isn't there some kind of conflict of interest? Technically, you'd report to my director of operations, not directly to me," Daniel pointed out. "But you're right that there's a power dynamic we'd need to be careful about, which is why I'm asking rather than assuming, and why I'm making it clear you can refuse without any impact on your job. Lena, I'm interested in you as a person, not as an employee, but I completely understand if you're not comfortable with that. Number first." Lena studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or ulterior motives, but all she saw was genuine interest mixed with respect for her autonomy. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Lena started her new position the following week, and the difference from her serving job was immediately apparent. She had an actual office, small but nicely furnished, with a window overlooking the city. Her responsibilities included visiting each of Daniel's 12 restaurants, observing operations, talking to both staff and management about what was working and what needed improvement. If you've ever left a toxic job and found something better, if you've ever had someone see your potential when you couldn't see it yourself, drop a comment and subscribe. This story shows us that sometimes standing up against injustice opens doors we never knew existed, that one person's courage to defend us can change the entire trajectory of our lives. At the Golden Spoon specifically, Lena worked with Ramon, the senior server who'd been promoted to general manager, to rebuild staff morale and implement Daniel's new policies. Many employees were initially skeptical, convinced these changes would be temporary or performative. But as weeks passed and the improvements remained, trust slowly began to build. Lena discovered she was good at this work, really good. Her experience as a server gave her credibility with staff who might otherwise have dismissed corporate initiatives. She knew what they dealt with daily, understood their challenges, could distinguish between legitimate complaints and baseless grumbling. Within a month, several employees who'd been planning to quit because of Collins's toxic management changed their minds. "You're making a real difference," Daniel told her during one of their weekly check-ins. "Staff turnover is down across all locations where you've implemented these changes. Guest satisfaction scores are up. You're proving that treating employees well isn't just ethically right, it's good for business." These check-ins had become something Lena looked forward to, though she wasn't quite ready to examine why. Daniel was professional but warm, genuinely interested in her observations and insights. He treated her like an equal despite the vast differences in their positions and wealth, asking for her opinion on major decisions and actually implementing her suggestions. 2 months into her new role, Lena finally agreed to dinner with Daniel. Not because she felt pressured he'd never brought it up again after his initial invitation, but because she genuinely wanted to spend time with him outside the professional context. They met at a small Italian restaurant, not one of Daniel's. He'd been careful about that in a quiet neighborhood away from downtown's bustle. Daniel arrived in jeans and a casual shirt, clearly making an effort not to seem intimidating in his wealth. "Thank you for giving me a chance," he said as they settled into their table. "I know the power dynamic makes this complicated." "It does," Lena agreed. "But I trust you. You've never made me feel like my job depended on being nice to you personally. You've been nothing but respectful and professional. That's the bare minimum of how people should behave," Daniel said. "But I'm glad you feel that way." Their conversation flowed easily, moving from work topics to more personal territory. Daniel talked about building his business from nothing, about growing up poor in rural Oregon, and the drive to prove he could be more than his circumstances suggested. "People assume wealth solves all problems," he said, "but it creates new ones. You stop knowing who you can trust, who likes you versus who likes what you can provide. Every relationship feels transactional." "That sounds lonely," Lena observed. "It is," Daniel admitted, "which is why meeting you felt significant. You didn't know who I was that night at the restaurant. You were just doing your job, being kind to guests despite being treated terribly by your manager. That authenticity is rare in my world." Lena shared more about her life with Tommy, about the challenges of being a 24-year-old raising a teenager, about the dreams she'd put on hold and was just now beginning to imagine pursuing again. "I always wanted to be a teacher," she said. "Not for the money, obviously, but because I loved the idea of shaping young minds, making a difference in kids' lives the way some of my teachers made a difference in mine. When my parents died and I had to drop out of college, I thought that dream was dead. But now, with the education fund you set up, maybe it's not." "You're already teaching," Daniel pointed out. "You're teaching my restaurant managers how to create respectful workplace cultures. You're teaching staff that they deserve dignity and have the right to report abuse. That's incredibly valuable teaching." "It's not the same as a classroom full of kids," Lena said. "But you're right. It is meaningful. I'm grateful for the opportunity." They talked for 3 hours, losing track of time until the restaurant staff began giving gentle hints about closing. Daniel walked Lena to her car, the old sedan she'd managed to keep running through sheer determination and creative budgeting, and hesitated at the driver's side door. "I'd really like to see you again," he said, "outside of work check-ins. Is that something you'd be interested in?" "Yes," Lena said, surprised by how much she meant it. "I'd like that." Over the following months, Lena and Daniel developed a relationship that felt both unlikely and entirely natural. They came from completely different worlds. He grew up poor but built massive wealth. She grew up middle class but was knocked into poverty by tragedy, yet they understood each other in fundamental ways. Daniel appreciated Lena's groundedness, her refusal to be impressed by wealth or status, her genuine kindness that extended to everyone regardless of their position. Lena appreciated Daniel's humility despite his success, his genuine desire to use his resources for good, his respectful treatment of her that never felt patronizing. Tommy became part of their relationship naturally. Daniel started joining them for family dinners, helping Tommy with homework, attending his school events when Lena couldn't get away from work. It wasn't forced or performative. Daniel genuinely liked her brother and enjoyed being part of their small family unit. "He's good for you," Tommy told Lena one night after Daniel had left. "You smile more, you seem less stressed, and he treats you like you're special, which you are." "It scares me sometimes," Lena admitted. "How different our lives are. What happens if this doesn't work out? I could lose my job, my education funding, everything." "Do you trust him?" Tommy asked. "I do," Lena said, realizing it was true. "He's never given me reason not to." "Then trust that. And Lena? Even if things didn't work out romantically, which I don't think will happen because he's clearly crazy about you, but even if they did, I don't think he'd take away the job you've earned or the education support. He's not that kind of person." 6 months into their relationship, Daniel invited Lena to a charity gala supporting scholarship programs for low-income students. "I know these events aren't fun," he prefaced. "They're full of wealthy people being performatively generous. But the cause matters, and I'd really like you there with me." Lena wore a dress Daniel had insisted on buying for her, elegant but not ostentatious, making her feel beautiful without uncomfortable. The gala was held at a luxury hotel, filled with Seattle's elite, making donations that would fund college educations for hundreds of students. Midway through the evening, the MC invited Daniel to the stage to announce a major donation. Lena watched from their table as Daniel addressed the crowd, talking about education as the path out of poverty, about giving opportunities to young people who had talent but not resources. "Tonight, I'm announcing the Rivera Family Scholarship Fund," Daniel said, and Lena felt her breath catch. "Named in honor of Lena Rivera and her brother Tommy, who lost their parents but never lost their determination to build good lives. This fund will specifically support students who've lost parents and are being raised by siblings or other young family members. It will cover full tuition, housing, books, and living expenses, recognizing that these students often can't work traditional part-time jobs because they're caring for younger siblings." Tears streamed down Lena's face as the ballroom erupted in applause. Daniel had created a scholarship program specifically designed to help young people in circumstances like hers and Tommy's, not as charity, but as recognition that these students deserved support. When Daniel returned to the table, Lena stood and hugged him tightly. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I wanted to," Daniel replied. "Lena, you changed my perspective on everything. You showed me that real strength isn't about building wealth, it's about maintaining dignity and kindness, even when life is devastatingly hard. This scholarship fund will help people like you and Tommy build futures despite tragedy. That's the best use of money I can imagine." Parity. A year after the night Collins had broken an egg on Lena's head, she stood in the Golden Spoon's completely renovated dining room for a special celebration. Daniel had asked her to meet him there, saying he wanted to show her the final changes they'd implemented based on her suggestions. The restaurant looked beautiful, still elegant, but now with visible touches that signaled respect for staff. A comfortable break room with actual seating and free meals. Updated scheduling systems that gave servers predictable hours and work-life balance. An anonymous reporting system prominently displayed in back-of-house areas. Photos of staff members showcased prominently alongside awards and reviews, signaling that employees were valued. "It's perfect," Lena said, looking around. "This is exactly what I hoped we could create." "You created it," Daniel corrected. "I just provided resources. Your vision, and your understanding of what staff needed, that's what made this transformation possible." No, they were alone in the dining room, which Lena found slightly unusual. "Where is everyone? I thought you said there was a celebration." "There is," Daniel said, "but I wanted a private moment first." He led her to the table where she'd been standing that night a year ago, where Collins had humiliated her in front of a packed restaurant. The same table where Daniel had first noticed her, first witnessed the abuse, first made the decision to intervene. "This is where everything changed for me," Daniel said. "I came to this restaurant planning a simple observation visit. Instead, I witnessed someone I'm supposed to be responsible for being treated with horrifying cruelty. And I met a woman whose grace and strength in that moment impressed me more than anything I'd seen in years." Lena felt her heart racing, sensing something significant was happening, but not quite believing what it might be. "Lena, this past year with you has been the best of my life. You've made me a better person, a better businessman, someone who understands that success means nothing if it's built on making others feel small. You've shown me what real strength looks like, caring for your brother, working terrible jobs with dignity, maintaining kindness when you had every reason to become bitter. I think..." Daniel dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Lena's breath stopped completely. "I'm asking you to marry me," Daniel said. "Not because I want to rescue you, you don't need rescuing. Not because I feel guilty about what happened, though I'm grateful every day that I witnessed Collins's cruelty and could intervene. I'm asking because I love you, because you make every day better, because I want to build a life with you and Tommy, to be part of your family, to face whatever comes next together." He opened the box, revealing a ring that was beautiful without being ostentatiously expensive. "Lena Rivera, will you marry me?" Lena looked at this man who'd defended her when she was powerless, who'd seen her worth when she could barely see it herself, who'd created opportunities not as charity, but as recognition of her capabilities, who'd become her partner, her advocate, her love. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying simultaneously. "Yes, absolutely yes." Daniel stood, sliding the ring onto her finger, and kissed her deeply. The dining room doors opened then, and staff poured in. Ramon and the other servers from the Golden Spoon, employees from Daniel's other restaurants, Patricia and other corporate staff, and most importantly, Tommy, who'd apparently been in on this plan all along. "You knew," Lena accused her brother, who grinned unrepentantly. "He asked my permission weeks ago," Tommy said. "Said he wouldn't propose without making sure I was okay with him officially joining our family. As if I was going to say no to the guy who's been like a dad to me for the past year." The celebration that followed was joyous and genuine, not the performative charity gala atmosphere, but real happiness from people who'd witnessed Lena and Daniel's relationship develop, who'd seen how they brought out the best in each other. As the evening wound down, Lena stood with Daniel exactly where she'd stood a year ago, remembering that awful night. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked. "If you hadn't come to the restaurant that night, if you'd looked away instead of intervening?" "All the time," Daniel admitted. "I think about how close I came to missing you entirely. If I'd scheduled my visit for a different night, if I'd sat in a different section, if I'd been too focused on my phone to notice what was happening, we might never have met. Or we might have met differently," Lena suggested. "Maybe I would have eventually quit and found another job. Maybe we would have crossed paths some other way." "Maybe," Daniel agreed. "But I'm grateful it happened the way it did. Not grateful that Collins abused you, that still makes me angry when I think about it, but grateful that I was there to witness it, to intervene, to meet you in a moment that revealed both our characters. You could have been bitter and angry after being humiliated. Instead, you maintained your dignity and grace. That told me everything I needed to know about who you are." They stood in comfortable silence, looking out at the elegant dining room that had been transformed from a place of fear and abuse into something better. Lena thought about the journey from that awful night to this moment, from powerless waitress to respected coordinator, from struggling single guardian to engaged woman with support and resources, from victim of workplace abuse to advocate helping others avoid similar treatment. What started as justice turned into admiration, turned into love, Lena said softly, echoing the words from the night they'd first had dinner together. Built on respect, not status. "Exactly right," Daniel confirmed, "and it's the strongest foundation I can imagine." As they prepared to leave, Lena took one last look at table 7, the table where a glass had broken, where Collins had cracked an egg on her head, where her life had changed forever in ways she couldn't have predicted. That moment of humiliation had seemed like rock bottom at the time, but it had actually been a beginning, the start of justice, transformation, and unexpected love. Sometimes, Lena thought, the worst moments of our lives contain the seeds of something extraordinary, not because the suffering is good, but because how people respond to witnessing that suffering reveals who they truly are. Daniel could have looked away, could have dealt with Collins privately later, could have offered financial compensation without personal involvement. Instead, he defended her publicly, valued her perspective, created opportunities for her growth, and eventually fallen in love with who she was rather than who he could make her into. That choice to see her humanity, to stand up for her dignity, to build a relationship on respect and genuine connection, had transformed both their lives. 3 years later, Lena and Daniel stood together at the grand opening of the Golden Spoon's 20th location. Daniel now owned an empire spanning 3 states, but every single restaurant operated under the principles they'd developed together: respect for staff, dignified working conditions, and systems that protected vulnerable employees. Lena had completed her teaching degree and was teaching part-time at a local elementary school while continuing to consult for Daniel's restaurant group on workplace culture. Tommy was 17, thriving in high school, talking about college applications and career aspirations that had seemed impossible 4 years ago, when Lena had been working doubles just to keep them housed and fed. "We've come a long way from that night," Lena said, watching staff prepare for the evening's grand opening celebration. "We have," Daniel agreed. "But you know what hasn't changed? You're still the kindest, strongest person I know, still caring for others even when you don't have to, still making everyone around you better just by being yourself." "I learned from the best," Lena said, squeezing his hand. "You showed me that standing up for what's right matters more than maintaining comfortable silence. That using privilege and resources to protect vulnerable people is the best use of both. That love built on mutual respect lasts." As guests began arriving for the celebration, staff from all Daniel's restaurants, community leaders, local officials, Lena reflected on the journey from powerless waitress to respected professional, from victim of workplace abuse to advocate preventing it, from woman left alone with crushing responsibility to partner in a marriage built on genuine equality. It had started with a broken glass, a cruel manager, and a man who chose to intervene rather than look away. That choice had rippled outward in ways neither could have predicted, transforming not just 2 lives but hundreds, creating systems that protected vulnerable employees, building a company culture based on dignity rather than hierarchy. And at the center of it all was a simple truth: how we treat people when we have power over them reveals who we truly are. Daniel had chosen kindness when he could have chosen indifference. That choice had changed everything. 5 years after the night that changed everything, Lena Hale stood in front of a classroom of 33rd graders at Riverside Elementary School, teaching a lesson about kindness and standing up for others. She'd officially become Mrs. Hale 2 years ago, though she still sometimes had to remind herself that the elegant ring on her finger was real, that the life she was living wasn't a dream she'd wake up from. "Can anyone tell me what it means to be an ally?" Lena asked her students, watching small hands shoot into the air with the enthusiasm only 8-year-olds could muster. "It means standing up for someone when they can't stand up for themselves," offered Jasmine, a bright-eyed girl in the front row. "Exactly right," Lena confirmed. "Being an ally means using whatever power or privilege you have to help someone who has less. It means not looking away when you see someone being treated unfairly, even if helping them might be uncomfortable or difficult for you." She told her students an age-appropriate version of her own story, leaving out the specific details of workplace abuse, but explaining how someone with power had stood up for her when she was being treated badly, how that act of courage had changed her entire life. The children listened with rapt attention, asking questions about fairness and justice and what they could do when they saw bullying on the playground. This was why Lena had wanted to be a teacher, not just to educate minds, but to shape hearts, to help children understand that how they treated others mattered, that small acts of courage could ripple outward in ways they couldn't imagine. After school, Lena drove to the Golden Spoon for a meeting with Daniel and Ramon, about expanding their workplace culture initiatives to restaurants beyond their company. Word had spread about the dramatic reduction in turnover and increase in guest satisfaction across Daniel's establishments, and other restaurant groups wanted to learn their methods. The key, Lena explained to the gathered restaurant owners and managers, is understanding that dignity isn't a perk you offer employees when it's convenient. It's the foundation of everything. When staff feel respected and valued, they provide better service, they stay longer, they become advocates for your business, rather than just workers collecting paychecks. She walked them through the systems she and Daniel had developed, anonymous reporting mechanisms that actually worked, regular surveys that were taken seriously, management training that emphasized servant leadership rather than authoritarian control, clear pathways for advancement that weren't based on favoritism. But doesn't this coddle employees? One skeptical owner asked. Don't they need to develop thick skin to work in this industry? No, Lena said firmly. They need to be treated like human beings doing difficult work that deserves respect. The restaurant industry has normalized abuse for too long. We've convinced ourselves that kitchens have to be toxic, that front-of-house staff should tolerate harassment, that high turnover is just the cost of doing business. But it doesn't have to be that way. She shared data. Daniel's company had collected lower turnover, saved significant money in recruitment and training costs. Better treated staff provided superior customer service, leading to increased revenue. Positive workplace cultures attracted top talent, making restaurants more competitive. This isn't just ethical, Lena emphasized. It's good business. You can build successful restaurants without breaking people in the process. After the presentation, several owners approached Lena privately, sharing their own stories of witnessing or experiencing workplace abuse, expressing genuine desire to change their company cultures. This was the work that gave Lena the most satisfaction, knowing that her experience, as painful as it had been, was preventing others from suffering similarly. That evening, Lena and Daniel hosted a family dinner at their home, a beautiful but not ostentatious house in a quiet neighborhood that felt more like a home than a showpiece. Tommy was there with his girlfriend, Keisha, home from college for the weekend. At 20, Tommy had grown into a confident young man studying business, with plans to eventually join Daniel's restaurant group after graduation. Did you ever think we'd end up here? Tommy asked Lena as they prepared dinner together. 5 years ago, we were in that tiny apartment. You were working doubles, and we were barely scraping by. Now look at us. You're teaching and consulting, I'm at a great college on a full scholarship, and we're part of this whole family. And I definitely never imagined this, Lena admitted. Some days I still can't quite believe it's real. That Daniel is my husband, that we have this life, that I get to do meaningful work both in the classroom and in the restaurant industry. Do you ever think about that night? Tommy asked. When Collins did that awful thing and Daniel defended you. All the time, Lena said. Not because I'm stuck in that trauma, but because it's such a clear before and after point in my life. Before that night, I thought my circumstances were permanent, that I'd work terrible jobs forever, that finishing my degree was impossible, that love and partnership were luxuries I couldn't afford. After that night, everything changed. Because Daniel saw you, Tommy said. Actually saw you, not just as a waitress, but as a whole person deserving of dignity and opportunity. Exactly, Lena agreed. And then he created space for me to build the life I'd thought was impossible. Not by doing everything for me, but by opening doors and trusting me to walk through them with my own strength. During dinner, Daniel shared news about the latest expansion, 3 new restaurants opening in different cities, all built from the ground up using the workplace culture principles he and Lena had developed. We're getting applications from top culinary talent, specifically because of our reputation for treating staff well, he said. Chefs who could work anywhere are choosing us because they know we'll provide safe, respectful environments. That's the dream, Ramon added. Ramon had remained general manager of the Golden Spoon, thriving in the role and becoming a mentor to newer managers across the restaurant group. 5 years ago, we were losing staff constantly because of Collins's toxic management. Now we have people who've been with us for years, who refer their friends to work here, who genuinely care about the restaurant's success. If you've ever wondered whether one person can truly make a difference in an entire industry, drop a comment and subscribe. This story proves that standing up against injustice doesn't just change individual lives, it can transform entire systems when people commit to building something better. After dinner, Lena and Daniel took a walk in their neighborhood, a ritual they'd established early in their relationship. The evening was cool, autumn beginning to assert itself, leaves turning gold and red in the fading light. "I have something I want to discuss with you," Daniel said as they walked. "I've been thinking about expanding the Rivera Family Scholarship Fund. Currently, it supports students who've lost parents and are being raised by siblings. But I'd like to broaden it, create support for any young person from working-class families trying to access higher education." "That would be amazing," Lena said. "But Daniel, you're already funding so many initiatives. The Scholarship Fund, the Workplace Culture Program, the Employee Assistance Fund for staff emergencies. Are you sure you want to take on more?" "I'm sure," Daniel said firmly. "Lena, before I met you, I was successful but directionless. I made money but didn't really know what it was for beyond accumulating more. You taught me that wealth is only meaningful if it creates opportunities for others. That success should be measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you enable." He paused, turning to face her directly. "You changed my life completely, not just by being my partner, though I'm grateful for that every day, but by showing me what actually matters, how we treat people, especially those with less power, what we build with our resources, whether we create systems that lift people up or keep them down." "You were already a good person," Lena protested. "You didn't need me to teach you values." "I had values intellectually," Daniel said, "but I wasn't living them fully. I'd convinced myself that running ethical businesses meant following labor laws and paying fair wages. I didn't understand that real ethical leadership meant creating environments where people could thrive, where dignity was guaranteed rather than grudgingly offered, where employees weren't just workers, but whole humans deserving of respect." "You learned fast," Lena said with a slight smile. "I had a good teacher." Daniel kissed her forehead gently. "And I want to keep building on what we've started. The scholarship expansion, but also something new, a training institute that teaches the workplace culture principles we've developed, not just for restaurants, but for any service industry. Hotels, retail, healthcare. Anywhere there are power dynamics that can be abused, we can teach better approaches." "That's ambitious," Lena said, though she could already feel excitement building. This was exactly the kind of systemic change that could prevent others from experiencing what she'd endured. "Will you help me build it?" Daniel asked. "Not as my employee or even just as my wife, but as my partner in this work. Your expertise and lived experience are what make these initiatives authentic rather than performative. I can provide resources, but you provide understanding of what actually helps versus what just sounds good." "Of course I'll help," Lena said. "This work matters, not just for people in the restaurant industry, but for anyone who's ever felt powerless in the face of abuse from someone with authority over them." 6 months later, Lena and Daniel stood together at the grand opening of the Hale Institute for Workplace Dignity, a training center and research facility dedicated to developing and teaching ethical management practices across service industries. The building was state-of-the-art but designed for accessibility and comfort rather than intimidation, with classrooms and meeting spaces that welcomed participants rather than making them feel out of place. The opening ceremony featured testimonials from people whose lives had been changed by the workplace culture initiatives Daniel and Lena had pioneered, servers who'd been promoted to management and were implementing respectful leadership in their own teams, former abuse victims who'd found the courage to report mistreatment because safe reporting systems existed, employees who'd stayed in the restaurant industry instead of leaving because working conditions had improved so dramatically. 5 years ago, Lena said in her opening remarks, I was humiliated in front of a packed restaurant by a manager who saw me as expendable and worthless. I thought that was just how the restaurant industry worked, that if you were in a service position, abuse was the price of employment. But one person witnessing that abuse and choosing to intervene changed everything. She gestured to Daniel, standing beside her on the stage. Daniel could have looked away that night, could have dealt with the situation privately to avoid disrupting his restaurant service, could have offered me financial compensation and considered the problem solved. Instead, he defended me publicly, fired the abusive manager immediately, and then committed to understanding and fixing the systemic issues that had allowed that abuse to happen. But the real transformation, Lena continued, came from what happened next. Daniel didn't just help me as an individual. He learned from my experience and used those lessons to change how his entire company operated. He created systems that protected vulnerable employees. He demonstrated that you can run successful, profitable businesses while treating people with dignity. And now, through this institute, we're teaching those principles to anyone who wants to build better workplace cultures. Daniel spoke next, sharing his perspective on the journey from that night to this moment. I used to think business success was measured in revenue and expansion. And yes, those things matter. You can't employ people or fund initiatives if your business fails. But I learned that real success is measured in how your employees feel when they come to work, whether they're empowered or intimidated, whether they can report problems without fear of retaliation, whether they go home exhausted but satisfied rather than traumatized. He looked at Lena with obvious affection. My wife taught me that. She taught me that the people serving food and clearing tables deserve the same respect as the CEOs eating in the dining room. That dignity isn't something you earn through position or wealth. It's something every human being deserves simply by existing. And she taught me that witnessing injustice creates responsibility to respond, even when responding is uncomfortable. The Institute's first class of participants included restaurant managers, hotel supervisors, retail district managers, anyone in a position of authority over service workers. The curriculum Lena had developed combined practical management skills with deep exploration of power dynamics, implicit bias, and ethical leadership. The goal, Lena explained to the first cohort, isn't to make you perfect. You'll make mistakes, mishandle situations, occasionally respond poorly under pressure. The goal is to create awareness of how your power affects others, to build systems that catch problems before they become crises, and to foster cultures where employees feel safe bringing concerns forward. She shared her own story in detail now, no longer afraid of appearing weak or damaged. The abuse she'd endured, the fear that had kept her silent, the transformative moment when someone with power had used that power to defend rather than exploit her. The participants listened with visible emotion, many clearly recognizing aspects of their own experiences or behaviors in her account. Some of you are sitting here feeling defensive, Lena said, reading the room accurately. You're thinking, I'm not like Collins. I'd never break an egg on someone's head. And maybe that's true, but abuse isn't always that dramatic. It's also the manager who schedules someone for a shift they specifically requested off as punishment for some perceived slight. It's the supervisor who publicly belittles an employee for a minor mistake. It's the leader who allows harassment to continue because addressing it would be inconvenient. She let that sink in before continuing. The question isn't whether you're as bad as the worst manager you can imagine. The question is whether you're actively working to be better, to create safer environments, to use your power to lift people up rather than keep them in place. Over the following years, the Institute trained thousands of managers across dozens of industries. The impact was measurable. Companies that sent managers through the program reported significant decreases in turnover, increases in employee satisfaction, and often improvements in customer service scores. The principles Lena and Daniel had developed in the restaurant industry were proving applicable far beyond their original context. 10 years after the night that changed everything, Lena stood once again in the Golden Spoon, this time for a very different kind of event. The restaurant was hosting a celebration for the 100th company to adopt the Workplace Dignity Certification Program, a voluntary accreditation that signaled commitment to ethical management practices. The dining room was filled with people whose lives had been touched by the work Lena and Daniel had pioneered. Former employees who'd found their voices and reported abuse. Managers who'd transformed toxic environments into supportive ones. business owners who discovered that treating people well actually improved their bottom lines. Ramon, still general manager after 10 years and now something of a legend in the industry, proposed a toast to Lena and Daniel, who proved that standing up for what's right isn't just ethically correct, it's transformative. Who showed us that power used to protect rather than dominate can change entire industries, and who built something lasting from a moment that could have been just another sad story about workplace abuse. As glasses clinked and applause filled the room, Lena looked at Daniel and thought about the journey from that awful night to this triumphant moment. She'd been so afraid then, afraid of losing her job, afraid no one would believe her, afraid that speaking up would only make things worse. But Daniel's intervention had shown her that sometimes, when someone with power chooses to use that power for good, impossible things become possible. "Do you have any regrets?" Daniel asked her quietly, while the celebration continued around them. "About how things turned out? About the path that brought us here?" "Not a single one," Lena said honestly. "I wish I hadn't been abused. No one should have to experience that. But I'm grateful for everything that came after. Meeting you, building this work together, creating systems that protect other people from what I went through. We took something terrible and transformed it into something meaningful." "You transformed it?" Daniel corrected. "I just provided resources, the vision, the understanding of what workers actually need, the authenticity that makes this work effective. That's all you, Lena." "It's both of us," Lena insisted. "You could have just given me money and walked away, considered your conscience clear. Instead, you committed to understanding and changing systems. That took humility and genuine care about people beyond what benefited you directly." Tommy approached them then, now 24, and working as operations coordinator for Daniel's restaurant group. "There's someone who wants to meet you both," he said, gesturing to a young woman standing nervously nearby. The woman introduced herself as Aisha, a server from a restaurant in another city that had recently adopted their workplace dignity program. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "6 months ago, I was being harassed by a customer, and when I reported it to my manager, he told me to tolerate it because the customer spent a lot of money. I almost quit the industry entirely because I couldn't take it anymore." She took a breath, composing herself. "But then our company went through your certification program. The new policies explicitly support staff in refusing service to abusive customers. Last week, when that same customer harassed me again, my manager backed me up. He asked the customer to leave and banned him from the restaurant. I felt protected instead of expendable for the first time in my career." Lena hugged Aisha, feeling tears prick her own eyes. "That's exactly why we do this work. So people like you, people like I used to be, don't have to choose between their dignity and their paycheck. You changed my life," Aisha said. "Not just by creating better policies, but by showing that someone with your experience could build something important. That surviving abuse doesn't make you broken. It can make you an advocate who prevents others from suffering similarly." After Aisha left, Lena and Daniel stood together, looking around the dining room where everything had begun. The table where the glass had broken was occupied by a family celebrating a birthday, laughing and clearly enjoying their meal. The spot where Collins had humiliated Lena now hosted a group of business professionals having a productive dinner meeting. The restaurant that had once represented fear and trauma now represented transformation and hope. "I think we did it," Daniel said quietly. "Not just created a successful business or even a successful training institute. We actually changed how people think about workplace culture in service industries. That's rare, Lena. That's meaningful." "We're not done yet," Lena said, though she smiled as she said it. "There are still toxic workplaces, still abusive managers, still vulnerable employees who don't feel safe reporting problems. We've made progress, but there's more work to do." "Always more work," Daniel agreed. "But that's okay. We're building something that will outlast us. Training programs and certification standards, and cultural shifts that will continue even after we're gone. That's legacy, Lena. Real, meaningful legacy." As the celebration continued, Lena reflected on the extraordinary journey from powerless waitress to respected advocate, From victim of abuse to creator of systems preventing it, from woman working doubles just to survive, to teacher and consultant changing entire industries. None of it would have happened without that awful night when Collins had broken an egg on her head. But more importantly, none of it would have happened without Daniel's choice to intervene. He could have looked away, could have addressed the situation privately later, could have maintained comfortable distance from messy human problems. Instead, he'd chosen courage. He'd chosen to see Lena's humanity and defend her dignity when she couldn't defend it herself. That choice, one man deciding to stand up for a powerless woman being abused, had rippled outward in ways neither could have predicted. It had transformed two lives, changed a company culture, created training programs, shifted industry standards, protected countless vulnerable workers from experiencing what Lena had endured. Sometimes justice arrives in dramatic moments, a wealthy owner appearing unexpectedly, an abusive manager publicly fired, a humiliated employee defended before an audience of witnesses. But real transformation, Lena had learned, came in the sustained work that followed those dramatic moments, the daily choice to keep building better systems, to keep teaching ethical leadership, to keep believing that dignity and success weren't mutually exclusive. As Lena and Daniel prepared to leave the restaurant that evening, passing through the dining room one final time, Lena paused at table 7, the table where everything had begun a decade ago. She could still remember that awful night with perfect clarity, the glass breaking, Collins's rage, the egg dripping down her face, the humiliation and fear that had made her want to disappear. But she could also remember what came after. Daniel's calm, commanding voice asking, "Is this how you treat your staff, mister?" Collins, his gentle kindness wiping egg from her face, his immediate firing of the abusive manager, his commitment to understanding and fixing the systemic problems that had allowed that abuse to happen. One person choosing courage over comfort, one person using power to protect rather than dominate, one person seeing another's humanity and refusing to look away from injustice. That choice had changed everything. "Ready to go home?" Daniel asked, offering his hand. "Ready," Lena confirmed, taking his hand and walking with him toward the exit, toward their car, toward the home and life and meaningful work they built together from the ashes of that awful night. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives contain the seeds of our greatest transformations. Not because the suffering is good, but because how people respond to witnessing that suffering reveals character and creates possibility. Daniel had responded with courage, compassion, and commitment to change, and Lena had responded by turning her experience into advocacy, her pain into purpose, her victimization into vision for something better. Together, they'd proved that standing up against injustice doesn't just help one person, it can transform entire systems when people commit to building something better. That love built on respect and shared values creates partnership capable of extraordinary impact. That the people society overlooks, servers and housekeepers and retail workers, often have the most valuable insights about how to create just, functional, humane workplaces. And it had all started with a broken glass, a cruel manager, and a millionaire CEO who happened to walk in at exactly the right moment and made exactly the right choice.